A'udhu billahi minash shaitanir rajim. Bismillahir rahmanir rahim. I begin, as I always begin, in the name of Allah, whose grace I seek in this and all other matters. Thank you for joining me, for my friends along the way. I want to introduce my friend. Lee is a Southeast Asian non-binary writer working in collective learning and memory. After 6 years documenting within feminist movements, they were inspired to co-create The Signs in Ourselves, Exploring Queer Muslim Courage in 2020, an inclusive Muslim well-being resource inspired by the Quranic verses 41:53 and 51:20 to 21, among others, made possible by the CSBR, which is the Coalition for Sexual and Bodily Rights in Muslim Societies. The publication is available as a free download for personal and collective use. And I am going to put the address in the comment section below so that you can do it. But those who are fast can also bit.ly/signs in ourselves, with both the 3 words sign in and ourselves in capitals. Actually, I'll put it in the chat while Lee is talking so you guys can download it now. Lee grew up with spirituality, science, the supernatural, and the internet, and maintains over 20 years of searchable notes and journal entries, along with a few houseplants. You have the floor.
Hello, Amina. Thank you for inviting me. I imagine this to be a conversation between us, so I also have a few questions for you along the way. I'm very, very, very grateful for this opportunity. And yes, I wrote The Signs in Ourselves, and I'm really excited to talk about it today with you, along with a little bit about myself, although this is very new to me in many ways.
I am very happy to make it more conversational, so don't worry about it. I will jump right in, if you don't mind. First of all, I am a student of yours, and in the time that I spent as your student, I realized that people who grow up in the digital world, unlike myself, whom I consider to be an analog woman in the digital age, that people who grew up in the digital world actually have a mode of operation, a language or hermeneutics, as it were, and that I am an outsider and I need sometimes to communicate between my location and the sort of the facility of the digital world. And I only learned this because of working with you, because I didn't sound like I was speaking as much of a foreign language as I always feel. I always feel outside of it. So actually, could you tell me some things that you have observed within your, first of all, your professional context of, searchable notes and journal entries? Tell me something about the way in which this digital age actually shapes what you do, how you identify yourself, and what you aspire to.
First things first, I have to say that it is a completely inverted experience with what you're saying, because I feel like I have so much to learn from you. I'm also a student of yours. And it's just as how you say there's a language or hermeneutics that maybe this, through this intergenerational friendship, you learn a little bit more of. What I feel like I'm so privileged to be able to learn is to learn more about the language of faith in general, right? Something that I felt was very inaccessible to me as a sexually diverse Muslim. Often, told that we don't have access to this sort of language, and we don't have many scholars who directly support our dignity. So to hear and learn about, say, the Tawhidic paradigm from you was very instructional for me, in finding a way to understand a little bit more about my own self and personality and the kind of Muslim I wanted to be. So your question was, through my observations, what have I learned about how the digital age shapes what I do and how I identify? I think what I've learned, if I could really summarize the process of not only just writing this book, but meeting the people I needed to meet, including you, to make this book happen, was that I think Muslims really need to change the way that we are having this whole conversation from about queer Muslims from the angle of sex and reproductive value, to something around the idea of gender as a part of human biodiversity, right? And to accept that preserving and respecting biodiversity is a priority that we have to make for our social and planetary survival, right? So this idea of digital age, if that shaped me at all, is that I had an analog childhood, but the moment the internet came, I remember feeling like my library just got much, much bigger. Like I could now find out about so much. And I think that's definitely something that's a gift and a curse in this whole age of the digital. I would say this idea of we have access to so much in basically our palm, so much information. And what do we want to do with that information? how does it change the conversations that we should be having? What else have I observed? Okay, I think I could squeeze in two more. I think other Muslims have a lot to learn from sexually diverse Muslims. That's something that was also a challenge in the spaces I've been in. I've met, self-identified like straight Muslims that like, listen, I'm straight and I would love to support you, but at the end of the day, like God, like this is just what it says. I can't support you, or you can be friends, but up to a certain point where I guess you're going to hell, right? And the flip side of that, or the implication of that, is saying is there are some things I just can't learn from you about being a Muslim. There is a limit to what I can learn from you or understand about God through someone like you. You have to learn something from me. You have to learn from what we've already, just the status quo, I suppose. But if we only listen to status quo Muslim narratives, like straight cisgender Muslim narratives, what does that do to our development of our personalities and our sense of purpose? Like, what does it do to the stories we tell about ourselves? So my third observation is this idea that sexually diverse Muslims, at the very least, I would say people who grew up, in the nutshell of it, people who grew up believing in God and then realizing that they weren't what was sexually considered normative. And then that affects their relationship with God, even though these two things are very separate. And it shuts them out. They have to learn the hard way. I had to learn the hard way that social acceptance is important, but self-acceptance is a spiritual experience. I had to learn that I had to learn to blame institutional failures instead of always blaming myself. And I had to learn to not erase myself so others like me won't know that I'm out here. Being on this call is something I'm terrified of doing. But I'm convinced that it is the right thing to do, to not erase myself and to not talk about these things I have to say. To value myself enough to realize that even if I don't perform reproduction, I'm still a valid Muslim, valid believer, and a diverse like Muslim ancestor in like the community sense of the word, right? Not like the family member sense. Yeah, that's sort of what I was thinking. When I think about the digital age, the internet has been very helpful in me coming to understand all these things that I'm telling you right now. I didn't just rely on the material that was available at a local level in maybe one language.
So many good points. Oh my goodness, I don't even know which one I should take up. First of all, I agree with you that the notion of diversity, which is an aspect of gender identity or sexual identity, is just a part of the spectrum of human diversity. So for the work that I have been doing since I had an opportunity to do some research, I literally started to make two sets of document files. And one was about the various aspects of gender identities in their, complexity and beauty. But the other was with regard to children who have different neural processing modalities. We have hundreds of kinds of autism today, and 100 years ago we had zero. And that means either that it is new, and it might be, I don't know, or it is only newly understood as an aspect of human diversity. And the intention is to take the innocence that we feel towards our children, because they recognize aspects of autism even in babies. So to take the innocence and say, the harm that comes when their particular operating, processors, neurodiversity is not acknowledged and nurtured, the harm that is done to this innocent is exactly the same kind of harm that different types of transphobia, queerphobia, biophobia that happens with regards to people whose expression of their gender identities does not fit the heteronormative dominant model. And so to deconstruct, as you said, to not have it just be about sex, because if everybody is performing sex when they have an opportunity to perform it, and they're all performing in accordance to their, orientation, and yet when you reduce it only to literally the genitalia, what you're saying is there's not a whole being. And the aspect of the whole being to me is so important. And that's why I called my research sexual diversity and human dignity, because there is no reason why our humanity should lose that dignity. And part of my learning that is actually relationship that I had with you. So I want to talk a little bit about the Tawhidic paradigm, because in your work, which she is going to share, they're going to share with us a little bit before we close this meeting. In your work, you made an explanation of the Tawhidic paradigm, and you sent it to me to make sure you quote unquote got it, but the dimensions that you shared really, it made my heart skip a beat. So please, can you talk to me a little bit about your experience with the Tawhidic paradigm?
Wow, okay. The Tawhidic paradigm changed my life. I'm just gonna start with that. And I took so long, I think. So yes, as you mentioned, the Tawhidic paradigm is in the book that we mentioned. And I think it was the last part of the book to get written because I was so nervous about summarizing what you've been talking about for essentially decades, right? Like into just like 2-3 pages in my book and go, here's a summary of Amin Wadud's theory on just this one topic of conversation. But how I understood it, I think I knew that it originally came around to create more symmetry in the imbalance between gender equality, right? Like codifying symmetry on the basis of that. And I thought that, and I still think that's important. I actually, before I continue, I should say that this whole struggle to decriminalize sexual diversity from an Islamic framework can only happen if we continue trying to democratize and decriminalize the same thing for women. There's just no future we are in where queer Muslims get liberation and justice first before Muslim women do. Okay. Anyway, on that note, that's how I understood Tawhidic paradigm first and foremost. I was just like, this is for gender equality. This is important. I should take note. And I was very lucky to be able to, as part of my job, to be in rooms with you where you were explaining this to women and making note of it and thinking about how would I how would I tell it as someone who doesn't always see themselves as a woman? There's something there about, I have to pull up the explanation I wrote. Forgive me a second. I need to jog my memory because I know I said something that was really sci-fi and I want to put it in here, but I don't want to paraphrase it wrongly. Give me a second.
No worries. Take your time. We're here for you. You are mute, so I hope you're not talking.
Yeah, I was just singing. I was singing like, where did it go? Where did it go? I was looking for the Tahitic paradigm that I wrote. So I was nervous to send this to you because I know that I wasn't writing about it from the perspective of gender equality. I was trying to write about it in a much larger sense that could be applied in the way that you're talking about when it comes to gender diversity or biodiversity as a whole, right? And in it, I mentioned this idea of thinking of Tawhid itself as a core operating system that connects my physical and my metaphysical realities. So this is a little bit of a fun thing because I think you met me through encounters with tech and technology. My perception of Tawhid was also from a perspective of tech or sci-fi in a way. And much like my devices, like my phone and my laptop, I need to upgrade my operating software to keep myself functional, right? So what does that look like? Upgrading my tawhid is to think about how my understanding of Allah changes and affects my beliefs as I grow. So I can, when you get a new phone, there's stuff in there that's pre-installed that you don't always want or use. I think that's sort of how we also enter the world. As we grow and we look at the things that have been installed inside us and go like, is this something that actually benefits me and helps me understand the world better or help me use this thing better? Or is it just bloated old software that's just been in here because of like contracts and arrangements made between companies for a long time, and it doesn't serve me actually, right? It doesn't serve me today. So I think about accepting downloads others have made for me. I think about what if I learn to code my own upgrades for myself because I'm not seeing what I want to see reflected in what I'm learning about faith, especially from the perspective of representation, right? So I had to look at the same thing that we all look at and think about how to look at it in a different way. I would like to read to you here the last paragraph of my summary of your Tahidic paradigm. And I said, yes, thank you. Since Allah is a circle with the center of everywhere and a circumference of nowhere, inside each of us is an essence, is that reflecting our union with this cosmic design. And we can choose to ignore this transcendent reality and emphasize the illusion of external superiority over others, or we can recognize the transcendent reality in all living beings and relate to each other in a reciprocal way. So I really liked how the Tawhidic paradigm made me think of it fit with the very Matrix kind of way. I don't know if you've seen the movie The Matrix. I don't know. It's a classic. And at the time, the creators did not come out yet, but they were both trans women. So brought to you by two trans women sisters is this vision of a world where the world is essentially a hologram. And I have that in my notes somewhere. The dunya is a hologram. And we are all like non-playable characters. And there's this beautiful quote, and I wish I remember who said it, but like we were given essentially free will to play this game however we wanted. And that is a measure, I think, of how much Allah believes in us, because how much you believe in other people is your capacity to enable an environment in which they may or may not disagree with you, right? And I felt like Allah gave us an environment so it totally permits complete disbelief in Allah. And in a way, I feel like Allah believes in us more than we believe in Allah. So to think about this whole sci-fi reality, to think about the idea of the world being a hologram and plugging in and out and thinking about pre-installed software, it all fit with the Tawhidic paradigm for me. And it was really helpful for me thinking through gender, just gender as a whole. And while we're on biodiversity, I think silence is quite important. And I think the only kind of biodiversity that Muhammad, peace be upon him, could not be silent about was racism, right? Like, he made it clear before he passed away in his last speech, like, racism is the thing. And it's 2021 and racism is still the thing. I feel like if sexual diversity was really a huge issue in terms of, say, who we can or cannot sleep with, I feel like that would have maybe been worthy of mentioning. And since the silence on that was so loud, what does that mean? Like, what does it mean that we see a silence of that sort of specific rhetoric in terms of informing on priorities? I hope I'm making sense.
No, it's interesting because, of course, people have asked me just in terms of the normative hegemonic binary of gender. People have asked me, well, why didn't Allah talk about this or talk about that or say this, or the Prophet, upon him be peace? And I have had to answer that in a theological way. And in terms of diversities of gender identities and or sexual orientations, I think that we all are going to be dependent upon notions of diversity and the way in which the Quran tackles that, rather than the specifics that we currently identify with, because otherwise it's endless. And I think the endlessness of human evolution and diversity is supposed to be that way, and therefore not everything was answered. So because, for example, the Quran does not condemn the institution of slavery, does not mean that I do not draw inspiration from the Quran from my own location of disagreement with slavery. So I also say that maybe the Quran doesn't give me every single detail, but I do see that there's a trajectory. And if we follow that trajectory, we make application in the ways in which, these things manifest in life. And then we are more hopeful because we don't ask. I often take from a friend's description of the Quran as like a cookbook. And that when you're really a cook, you don't follow anybody's book precisely. You augment or you take away. Oh, so-and-so has an allergy to cilantro, so I have to substitute parsley instead. You enhance and take away from the recipe in accordance to what you already know. So therefore, with regard to the Quran, it's not a literal thing that we just sort of take. It is a dynamic thing which we interact with. And in our active participation in its meaning, then we are allowed to have a diversity of locations on different ways in which things are articulated. And then it's not a prison, it's a tool of liberation, I think.
Yeah, I have a response for that and a question for you. I was thinking, is this oh no, I lost it. Wait, I have it. It comes back to my first point earlier about how we need to move away from defining ourselves. I totally relate, as I've received from queer people, queer Muslims. Like, I've looked for myself in the Quran and I couldn't find it, and I'm like, how were you looking for yourself when you looked for yourself in this Quran, right? Like, and it comes to how do we define ourselves? I've always had an issue with, say, LGBT as a label, because I felt like, this wasn't even because of the Muslim stuff. I felt that even when I was like going through my agnostic phase, I still felt issues with this LGBT label because I don't like relating myself, describing myself on this relational level of who I want to fall in love or have intimacy with. And so how can I define myself based entirely on who I want to be with. I feel like there's got to be ways of defining myself that hold even when no one is around me, you know, like even when we're completely alone, like we're never alone because Allah is there. So this idea of, if I'm not with anyone right now and I'm in a room, what sexual am I? And why does it have to be a label? Why does that have to be the label? If I'm looking for someone who wants to have certain sexual relationships with someone in the Quran, I'm going to find the same thing. We're going to talk about lut all over again. We're going to talk about zina all over again. But what if we talk about the other verses in the Quran, you know, many of which have listed in the signs in ourselves, the verses in the Quran that talk about Allah talking about what they've made. Like, look at the diversity of creation I have made, right? And even the verses that inspired this whole book were verses that were saying that there are signs, as ayah, of truth inside yourself. So it's not just, I have to look outside, I have to find Quran, I have to find a scholar, I have to find a hadith that can tell me that Allah loves me. When Allah in the Quran has said multiple times that the signs inside you, I've made you mates along your own nature, that everybody has different natures and everybody has different tastes. Why can't we use those verses when we think about, I couldn't find LGBT friendly verses in the Quran? I think we have to stop looking at ourselves from the perspective of the people who want to reduce us to just like sexually deviant beings, and start thinking about us as outside the bedroom for starters, and in public life, right? What kind of dignity do we get? Because we have, you know, people who are, everybody, this is the funny thing, every Muslim I've met, and I live in a Muslim majority country, knows someone who is sexually diverse. They know someone who is trans or gay or lesbian or bisexual or asexual, and they don't even and yet they still want to hold this idea that their friends has a limit of how much Allah can love them. You know, it's a little weird for me. It's almost like saying, who loves your friend more? What kind of world have you rationalized for yourself in which you have so much love and compassion for your friend that you can continue being their friend, but Allah does not? Like, Allah ultimately does not. What are you saying about yourself as a person when you talk about sexually diverse Muslims? And it's worthy to ask, because straight Muslims talk about us a lot. Anyway, my question for you, Amina, I did have a question. I wanted to say that I quoted in the book something you said at an event to Muslim women around the world. And you said that in our time, diversity is the challenge to our current realities. And you said, for me, in terms of Islamic theology and ethics, how we deal with sexual diversity in the Muslim community will be the ethical question of our time. So I have my own ideas of that, which I kind of explained, but can you explain that a little bit more? And I know that you've been going through a lot of classical texts, and I wonder if you can also talk about what that experience was like, about sounding old or fresh. What does it mean to be ahead of our time, if that makes sense? It's like,
I'm
oh,
not going to talk
today.
I'm not going to talk about being ahead of our time. That's too weird. But I will say something about the ethics of
yes,
gender and sexual diversity as the challenge. It piggybacks a little bit on your thing about, I don't see LGBTQ in the Quran. And actually, my new favorite thing that I learned with regard to text is the embrace of ambiguity. That is, how to take the unsaid, and flesh it out for meaning. And I got that from doing the research on sexual diversity and human dignity, because I came to too many places where it was simply not answered. And I all of a sudden realized, oh, it's the unanswered, the unspoken, which is itself a tool of guidance. So I proposed that for most Muslims, like, there is a generic understanding of a comprehensiveness of justice. And then in the gender binary context of social justice work, we said, well, how can there be justice if Muslim women don't experience it? So we challenge justice as experience. The question of Islam being for all times, all places, and all people, that's what it says. It's universal. It's not just for Muslims from Malaysia or Saudi Arabia or, you know, black or white, whatever. It's supposed to be all times and all places. Then it cannot have a comprehensive, closed door relationship with people whose sexual diversity is not a part of the heteronormative dominance. And that means that for your friends who say, well, I love you because you're my friend, but Allah cannot love you, what they're basically saying, as you have clearly noted, is that there's a limit on Allah, but somehow they are above that. So instead, we need to understand that if there is no limit to Allah, then Allah embraces everything in the creation, and that includes people whose sexual location is not a part of the hegemonic binary. And I say it is the question of the future, because this cannot just be emotionally, Lee is my friend, and I want them in my life. It has to be, Lee is a person, I am a person, and my personhood and their personhood is simply a reflection of person in the context of Allah's creation. And there's no other criteria or evaluation that has to come in, not whether I love them or not even. So it has to move beyond. Of course, it's important to start with the personal, because that's how people come to open up. But it can't stay there. It has to go to the ethical. And when it goes to the ethical, then it has to be formulating some comprehensive notion about how the universe works, and how that universe works. As you say, it has to be with an operating system that includes everything that's within it, like Tawheed. So for me, I'm using this as a challenge to people whose comfort zone within their entrenched heteronormative, dominant, binary hegemony, that your comfort in that location is an intentional reflection of the limits that you believe that that system is operating under. And I personally don't believe that there's a limit, so you need to check yourself. That's where it went.
Yeah, yeah.
I'm going to ask you one more thing, or demonstrate something, and see how you can respond, and then we'll just look at the book, and then we'll open up to the gallery, because time moves fast. Okay. The question that it's not really a question, but actually I want to share with you, and then you can respond any way you like. And that is when we were holding a Musawa workshop sponsored with Sisters in Islam in Cyberjaya, and Friday came along. So before, like maybe on Thursday evening, maybe Wednesday, I don't remember, I was approached by another one of the teachers, like, oh, I had an idea, why don't we hold a Jummah and you be our Imam? Of course, I'm the lady Imam. And I always go back to, if you build it, they will come. I said, you know what? We can do this. I don't even have to participate. And I experienced the most amazing Jum'ah, where every single role was participated in by a member of our collective. Not everybody got to play a role, but instead of having one person, or even two people, or even three people, or four people, we had a jama'ah made of, jama'ah means, joining together, or a group. We had a group Jum'ah that was formed by a group of, orchestrators. And I was so smitten by this experience. And I believe you were one of the major motivators in helping to organize that. Can you tell us a little bit about that experience for you? Hope you remember.
I remember that Jum'ah. It was a very emotional Jum'ah for me. But I don't think that I organized it. I was a participant at the workshop, and that was one of my second or third times ever meeting you. And I was still so blown away by being in the same room with all these people. I remember that Jummah particularly because it was a very, very stunning khutbah given, I think, before you by a local poet. Yeah. And I think it was the idea of expansion. She quoted I think it was Musa's dua to Allah to expand his chest, right? I think it was from Surah Shah. Anyway, that was an emotional Jummah for me because I remember that you said something there about solidarity for LGBT Muslims. I don't know if you remember saying this, but it was a theme that had come on and off at this event because, and it was interesting being in a room with Muslim women feminists at the time who were very clear about, you know, working on all the issues they needed to work on, but also having to make more and more room for the reality of there being sexually diverse Muslims among them. And anonymously had come up a day or so before that someone had put on a post-it, once realizing that some of the people in the room were LGBT, said like, you know, how can we accept LGBT people? And I remember a friend of mine at the meeting standing up and making a bit of a statement about that. And it gave everybody food for thought. They're like, we are literally among you and you're still asking this question. It's something to think about. And I wasn't sure if anyone would ever directly acknowledge it throughout the event. And then you did. I think this is the day you acknowledged it. It was during the Jummah and or after. And it moved you to tears. I think you were saying that, you know, it wasn't always easy, I think, to think about how to even think about the kind of struggle that they would need the way of standing up for them. But you were compelled to think about it because when you were being cyberbullied and so on, the ones that always held solidarity for you were the queer Muslims. And that moved you into thinking, I need to somehow do the same thing. And I remember looking at you tearing up and then also kind of tearing up myself, thinking, like, I just wish more straight Muslims thought about this a little bit more, this idea of how much, how active these people that they speak about are in their own communities doing work. There's so many examples in the book, in the Sanja cells, of trans women who were so persecuted and marginalized in Indonesia, but always giving back to their community, giving haircuts for free during Ramadan and everything. Little things like that. Anyway, that was what I thought about when I thought about that Musawa gathering. I thought it was very interesting to see this arc come out across a couple of days and culminate with this very moving gesture of solidarity from you to people in the room, you know, myself included at the time. So that was extremely moving. And after that, I remember anybody who, because I meet a lot of LGBT people who are like, I'm skeptical about who supports us or who would defend us. I would always say, like, I'm just one of them. I was there, I saw it happen. So that's, whether you like it or not, part of your legacy already.
On that note, I have so much again that I could say, but if you have questions or comments that you'd like to make to Lee, please put them in the chat, or at least just say I have a question, please, and I will acknowledge you. But for now, we're going to take a quick look. What I need to do, which I should have done at the beginning, is to make Lee the co-host, and that way they will be able to share their screen. And on that basis, we can see a little bit of the signs in ourselves. Yes.
Yeah, let me pull it up and then.
You can tell us a little bit about the process of writing it as you're pulling it up, how you came to do it. Absolutely. And the challenges of doing it and the joys of doing it, and do your own self-promo, in other words.
Sure thing. I did this, I had this idea, like maybe late 2019, after being in all these spaces and thinking about all the things I've mentioned. Some of them I mentioned with you today, about what we could learn from queer Muslims. I think I was mainly obsessed with that, because if we can't even get a collective ummah to admit that they have something to learn from a Muslim, just because, even though there's sexually diverse, I think we can open the doors to a lot of other discourse. So the intention of the book was to write a workbook as well. So it was actually it was written for and by queer Muslims. I found my slides. Okay, let me share my screen. This is a bit messy, but can you see this?
It's there now.
Okay, cool. Yeah, so these are the two verses, Quran verses, that inspired me to write this whole book. The first being from Ad-Dariyat, which says, "On earth there are signs for those with sure faith, and in yourselves too, do you not see?" And the second being from Fusilat, which is, "We shall show them our signs in the universe and in themselves until it becomes clear to them that this is the truth. And is it not enough that your Rob witnesses everything?" Which is a great question to ask on the worst days. So these two verses told me that signs of truth exist in nature and in people, and not just in Quran and Sunnah, and that they're sources of knowledge from here out to the cosmos and deep within the universe of our own bodies. And this gave me so much peace to find out, because it didn't feel any more than that I had to fight with the truth I knew to be true in my heart versus what people were saying around me. So I thought, instead of spending energy countering what others say, what if we collectively build spiritual strength and reclaim this authority of the divine? And what if that's what queer Muslim collective care looks like? That we don't start the next generation on empty, because a lot of sexually diverse people who are exploring ways out of spiritual poverty and thinking about embracing different faiths, usually they feel kicked out of of being a Muslim, and then they then feel like they're like the first queer Muslims to have ever existed in the world, which is just not true. And I thought, what if our lives are rich with signs for us to learn from? And I wanted to make a project about that, especially because a lot of us are healing from the trauma of inflicted by people using faith as an excuse. So I did, this is the signs in ourselves. This is the cover. The middle part here is the cover. And you'll see two names in the front. The first is mine, and the second is Dhiyanna Hassan, who did the art in this book. And the reason why that's important is because this book is so visual. Well, what's in here is queer Muslim stories. So the heart of the book is based on 12 interviews with Southeast Asians. And my only qualification for participation in this is that you have to self-identify as a Muslim, even if other people say you're not. and you also have to not be a cisgender or heterosexual. So as long as you're not straight or you're not cisgender, you can be in this book. That was basically how I wanted to set the criteria. And it has voices from 14 other countries as well. And the book has art, like I said earlier, lots of art. It starts off with like the most rainbow al-Fatiha ever. And then there's also a workbook. There's 13 exercises in there for the self and the collective. And since I know, Amina, you like to draw and color a lot at meetings to help you focus, the exercise I attached to your Tawhidic paradigm module was like, for this exercise, everyone's like, it's going to be a hard question about Tawhidic paradigm. I was like, no, for this exercise, you just have to draw your own prayer mat. And everyone says it's their favorite exercise. The reviews for this book say that drawing their own prayer mat's been their favorite exercise in this book. And then there's 4 helpful sidebars. So you're one of them, specifically the Tawhidic paradigm. Although I recognize your work is full of lessons for us to learn, I just wanted to take the Tawhidic paradigm as that essential starting point. And then there's also Dr. Ghazala Anwar's Portal of Rahma, and a whole section on challenging the prioritization of reproduction through work from queer interfaith Indonesians. So I'm so proud of the people that stepped up to be a part of this book. I asked them these questions and they answered back to me. Some of them they didn't answer, all of it, but I recorded their answers and I sorted them out throughout the book. So that's what you get when you read it. You'll find questions that I think not only people have wondered about queer Muslims, but also queer Muslims wonder about other queer Muslims. I wanted to make that book as well. So what is it like to be queer in other countries and Muslim? And I feel that so many people were generous with their answers and their experiences. And that's the download link and the email for feedback. So that's a little bit about the book. And
the link is also in the chat. And so
yes,
anyone who is currently present might want to sneak in there and copy it right now, because you get this beautiful, amazing work for free.
It's so powerful.
I spoke with Dhiyanna about also coming on and talking a little bit about what she does with art as therapy. So we're trying to, work out a date because she's very busy with her own schedule, but that's in the works. By the way, she's already done a session for this Patreon page on crystals, from which I learned so much. I have to go back and review several times as I keep growing and learning with my own crystals. Every single page is beautiful in both its content and its expression. The idea of centering on queer Muslim spiritual self-expression is nothing short of just like stellar. It's just like such an amazing thing to do. There's nothing like this out there. And one of the ways in which my own kinship with the queer Muslim community grew was to be in live sessions, usually retreats, where the level of spiritual enthusiasm was unparalleled to any place that I had been, including going on Hajj. And as a matter of fact, when I made this critique at one of the queer Muslim retreats that I was in about how I wish I could take sort of the energy of the queer Muslim spaces I had been in when we do zikr in the morning and prayer and, Juma and whatnot, to take that energy with me to Hajj, because my Hajj had been rather spiritually unmotivating because the company I had to be in with the company I had chosen. So actually a queer Muslim organized for me to be the spiritual resource person for a queer Muslim Umrah. So I got to get my two things together, which was also amazing. It's also online. He's published a number of things from that experience, Lutfi from France. So this publication allows you to, I don't know what the digital language is. In the old school terms, we used to have a book. You could say, put it in your hand, but you can have this resource on your device for free. And I'm telling you, as a used to be retired, now returning professor of Islamic studies, this is unique. And not only unique, but the beautiful unique, because there's unique and it's weird, This is just such an amazing thing. And not only that, I think that everyone will see themselves reflected here. And the whole point about, I believe, that, if I might jump in to say this, the whole point about, signs in ourselves, fi anfusikum, in your own self, as the Quran says, is to highlight the reality that we are all mirrors that reflect the reality of Allah. And this work really lets you see that. And I'm hoping that you get 1 million downloads and go down in history as the first person to realize that focusing on the spiritual realities of queer Muslims is the way to go forward towards equality and justice, inshallah. So I hope you all success. I have some comments in the chat. Every day I continue to be awed by this book, both content and aesthetics. You can see how much thought and care put into this work. I expect no less from Lee, honestly. This is gorgeous. I can't wait to read it. Man can have nothing but what he strives for. Actually, that should be read. Human can have nothing but what they strive for, because when we translate the Quran, we want to make sure we stay inclusive, even though most translations out there are not. Our signs, our choices are how we actualize God's gift in ourselves. So that is the discourse. I'm still hoping someone will ask a question, or feel free to make a comment before our next 5 minutes are up, because I have so much I can say. I'm in love with Lee. I've always been in love with her from the very first moment that I met her. She has, and the fact that she made me feel not stupid with regard to the thing that I'm still struggling with, which is sort of the reality of the digital world.
You're doing great.
I feel like for my age, I'm not too bad. But I don't want to take up all the time, because I really want to share with the gallery. So please, take advantage of this opportunity.
And if not, I mean, I'm happy to just have conversations with you. We can talk about so much already.
I hope you don't mind. I would love to, we hold small group sessions in my Patreon page, which is just a place for us to kind of like spiritually attune and relax at the same time, because it's not like published or for anybody's. I would love to go through this a little bit in some of those small group sessions, because I really want to see this promoted in other places. The very fact that even for my own self-identity, my evolution and understanding, my orientation. By the way, I identify as queer because I have been involuntarily celibate for more years of my life than I care to count, and for the majority of the years of my life. And that means that my sexual orientation is not always known to me, because I have no way to even understand what it is. And I'm open to more than one location. Yeah, so I mean, I'm open to more than one possibility. But I definitely believe I can love a woman as much as a man, and a trans as much as a cis. So I identify as queer. I also identify as non-binary, and that is because Tawhid has really, helped me to understand that we also need to integrate the masculine and feminine of our own bodies and being, our own modes of operating, as a way to be able to achieve, our highest self. So at the moment, I'm no longer a straight ally. I clearly identify within the queer, Muslim context. And it has evolved.
We have a queer elder.
And I'm so, we have a lot of queer elders. There's a couple of other people who are in that age range. Speaking of which, El Farouk Kaki is going to be my next guest on Friends Along the Way. And he is also a queer, spiritually oriented activist who has been at it for more than 20 years. So look forward to that second weekend in March. I see that this year in particular, I want to continue to highlight the activism, scholarship, spirituality, love, and challenges, as well as contributions in other ways for queer Muslims, because it is my goal that at the end of the contract that I currently have, that I will have up and running this study center for queer Islamic studies and theology. So I thought what I should do along the way is I should just highlight just amazing friends like Lee, who I'm so happy to call a friend, and to share. I love that they have grown in their own estimation of the significance of the contributions that they can make towards humanity at large. I think this book, Science in Ourselves, is something that we will always be looking back on, and that future generations will simply, piggyback off of this to create more amazing projects. But I think the inspiration to move forward with this at this time is just like really nothing short of complete barakah. And so I'm so grateful for you.
Thank you so much, Ami. I agree with you entirely. I think we are all reflections of a mirror that's too big for us to see. And I guess if I could close it with anything, it would just be, if anyone's listening to this and they don't identify as a queer Muslim, and they're like, well, what am I supposed to do besides, support y'all? I think there's lots of ways of looking at it, and I wanted to close with that, just a message to those out there who aren't queer, that Muhammad, peace be upon him, had a vision of a world where orphans were adopted and loved by responsible adults. And I think that that's always a good place to start. There's layers of benefits to adjusting around that. And I included those questions in the book. I asked, what if heterosexual marriage wasn't your only option for a stable life, right? What if every child born was a child that was wanted and prepared for? What if orphans were adopted and safe at any age, regardless of being teenagers or whatever? And what if older generations were guaranteed care without the pressure to raise their own caretakers? So solo elderly adults would no longer be one of our most vulnerable members of society. So there's benefits of thinking, it's not, how do I start dislodging LGBT Muslims from just thinking about them purely from a sexual perspective or sexualized perspective, is to really think about the effects of their of the rights and the capacities through every stage of life, just as you would for any other Muslim. And if you look at that in terms of policies, in terms of care, you'll find that you'll find stories. You'll find stories of partners who've been together for 10 to 15 years, but can't visit each other in emergency units in hospitals because they're not family. Thinking about what the definition of family is, thinking about what a family of kinship is, and really expanding that now more than ever across. If we can do that across race, and if we can do it across generations, I think we can also do it across these ideas of our innate diversities. So thank you, Abdul Haq. I see your chat saying this is a brilliant starting place. I'm glad you think so. Then thank you for listening. Thank you for having me, Ami. I'm so blessed to have you in my life.
Thank you so much. On that note, we will close. Thank you so much. Salam.